The moment my son-in-law placed that pen in my hand and said, "Just sign here, Miriam, it's what Claire would have wanted." Something inside me went very still, not calm, still. The way the air goes still right before a tornado touches down. I'd driven 11 hours straight from Tucson to Denver the night before, my hands white-knuckling the steering wheel the whole way, crying through New Mexico and most of Colorado. My daughter, my Claire, my 54-year-old Claire, who still called me every Sunday morning without fail, who still laughed at my bad jokes, who had just gotten back from a yoga retreat in Sedona 2 weeks ago, was in the ICU at St. Andrew's Medical Center with a massive stroke, and the doctors were saying she wasn't going to make it. That's what my son-in-law, Brandon, had told me on the phone. Massive stroke. Irreversible brain damage. They needed someone to authorize withdrawing life support, and as Claire's healthcare proxy, she'd made me that quietly 3 years ago when things between her and Brandon started feeling off, that someone was me. I want to ask you something before I go any further. Have you ever walked into a room and felt in your bones, before a single word was spoken, that something was deeply, terribly wrong? Not just grief, not just shock, something more specific than that. Like a smell you can't name but that your body recognizes as danger. Drop a comment below and tell me, because what I felt the moment I stepped into that hospital room on a Wednesday afternoon in March. With Brandon already holding those papers out toward me. With that woman standing near the window, pretending to look at her phone, that feeling is the only reason my daughter is alive today. Let me back up. Claire had married Brandon 8 years earlier, and I really had tried, to love him the way you love someone your child loves. He was a financial advisor, well-dressed, articulate, the kind of man who always knew the right thing to say. Too articulate, sometimes. The kind of articulate where you finish a conversation and realize 10 minutes later that he hadn't actually answered any of your questions. Claire was a pediatric occupational therapist. She loved her work in a way that I recognized because I'd spent 35 years as a family law paralegal and I knew what it looked like when a person genuinely cared about what they did. She was warm and a little stubborn, and she made the best green chile enchiladas I've ever tasted, and she had been trying quietly and privately to figure out how to leave her marriage. She hadn't told Brandon yet. She'd told me. We talked about it over Christmas, sitting in my kitchen in Tucson while he was out at some client dinner. She said she'd been consulting with a divorce attorney named Ms. Harrington, and that once she had her ducks in a row, she was going to file. She was worried because she and Brandon owned everything jointly. The house in Cherry Creek, the investment accounts, the vacation property up near Breckenridge. She'd put her own inheritance from her father into that house. She wanted to make sure she protected herself first. She never got the chance. The phone call came on a Monday morning, 8 days before I arrived at that hospital. Brandon's voice was shaking, or doing a very convincing imitation of shaking. He said Claire had collapsed in the kitchen. Aneurysm, he said. No warning. He'd found her on the floor and called 911 immediately. By the time the paramedics arrived, she was already unresponsive. I booked a flight for the next morning and spent 16 hours at her bedside while Brandon hovered nearby, alternating between red-eyed silence and these very polished, very practiced summaries of what the doctors had said. The attending physician, a Dr. Caldwell, had a way of speaking that I couldn't quite put my finger on. Thorough, measured, but somehow leaving me feeling less informed after every conversation than I'd been going in. Every time I asked a direct question, Brandon would answer it before Dr. Caldwell could open his mouth. I went back to my hotel that night feeling hollowed out. I wasn't sleeping, I was barely eating. I told myself it was grief, that I was looking for something to be wrong because it was easier than accepting the truth. Then I noticed the woman. She appeared the second evening, around dinner time, when the ICU was quiet. She looked about 40, dark hair, expensive shoes. And she came in with the confidence of someone who had been there before, who knew where to stand and how to angle herself so the nurses wouldn't ask questions. She embraced Brandon, and it wasn't the way you embrace a friend or a colleague. It was the way you embrace someone you have been waiting to hold. He saw me watching and stepped back quickly, and she turned to me with a smile that didn't touch her eyes. You must be Claire's mother, she said. I'm Ingrid. I've been supporting Brandon through all of this. He's been just devastated. Brandon called her a grief counselor that the hospital had connected them with. But I'd worked in family law long enough to know what a fair posture looks like, and Ingrid had it from her highlighted hair down to her designer ballet flats. By the time Wednesday afternoon arrived and Brandon called to say the doctors felt it was time to make a decision, I was raw with exhaustion and running on coffee and something that felt like dread. I drove to the hospital telling myself I was overreacting, telling myself that my own suspicions about the marriage were coloring how I saw everything. That I was a grieving mother who needed to let her daughter go with dignity. I walked into Claire's room at 2:15. Brandon was there with Ingrid, who was no longer pretending to be anything official, just standing close to him like she'd already started moving in. The papers were on the rolling tray table beside Claire's bed. There were 4 signature lines. Brandon had helpfully placed small arrows of sticky notepaper next to each one. Miriam, thank you for coming, he said, and his voice had that practiced warmth in it that had always made my skin prickle. I know how hard this is. But Claire is gone. You know she wouldn't want to be kept alive by machines. I looked at my daughter. She was pale and still, her chest rising and falling with the rhythm of the ventilator, and I reached for the pen. A hand closed around my wrist. Not hard, not aggressive, but firm and trembling. I turned. A young nurse, mid-20s maybe, with her auburn hair pinned back under her scrub cap and eyes that were doing their absolute best to look composed and failing, had appeared at my elbow. She couldn't have been out of nursing school more than a few years. Mrs. Aldridge, she said so quietly that Brandon across the bed couldn't hear her over the hum of the monitors. Please don't sign those yet. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking. Brandon looked up. Nurse, he checked her badge. Nurse Keating, this is a private family matter. I understand, sir. She didn't flinch. I need to discuss Mrs. Aldridge's medication protocol with her family. It'll take 5 minutes. It's hospital policy. He stared at her for a moment in that particular way of his, the way that was meant to communicate that you had overstepped and he was deciding whether to punish you for it now or later. Then he looked at me. Miriam, don't be long. I followed the nurse. Keating, her badge said, first name Shiobon, down the corridor and into a family consultation room. She locked the door, and then she stood there for a moment with her hand still on the doorknob, breathing. I could lose my job for this, she said. I want you to know I know that going in. Then tell me quickly, I said. She turned around. Her eyes were steady now, even though her hands weren't. Mrs. Aldridge, I've been your daughter's primary nurse for 6 days. I've been watching her charts every shift because something hasn't been adding up to me. The neurological assessments that Dr. Caldwell has documented, they don't match what I'm seeing at bedside. 2 days ago, during a night shift, when it was just me and your daughter in that room, I performed a sternal rub. Do you know what that is? I did. I'm not a medical professional, but I'd worked in family law long enough to have handled cases involving medical power of attorney, wrongful death, elder abuse. I knew what a sternal rub was. It was a pain response test. You pressed your knuckles hard against the sternum. Brain-dead patients didn't react. She pulled away, Nurse Keating said. Not dramatically. But she pulled away. The room went a little sideways. The sedation levels in her chart, she continued, pulling out her phone, have been adjusted upward 3 times since Monday. Each time the order was signed by Dr. Caldwell, but 2 of those adjustments happened outside his normal rounds, and 1 happened at 2 a.m. with no corresponding nursing note. I reported it to my charge nurse. She told me I was misreading the documentation and to let it go. She showed me photos she'd taken with her phone. Time-stamped images of the IV bag and the medication log. A note in handwriting that wasn't consistent with the other entries. There's something else, she said. She was choosing her words carefully now, the way people do when they're about to say something they can't unsay. Last Friday night, I came back onto the floor to pick up a sweater I'd left in the break room. I saw Mr. Aldridge, your son-in-law, in the hallway outside your daughter's room. He wasn't alone. Dr. Caldwell was with him. I saw Mr. Aldridge hand him something. They didn't see me. I sat down. My daughter had been trying to leave this man. She had an inheritance locked up in that house. She had investment accounts. She had a life insurance policy. I knew she had one because I'd helped her pick it out years ago, $1.2 million, with me listed as secondary beneficiary and Brandon as primary. She had a will that, as far as I knew, left everything to Brandon with the understanding that they would update it once they had children, which they had not yet done. She was worth considerably more dead than alive to a man who knew she was about to walk out the door. What proof do we have? I said. What can we actually document? I have my photos, she said. I have my own nursing notes, which I've been keeping separately, off the hospital system, because I was scared they'd be altered. And I have a colleague, a neurologist on a different service, Dr. Osi, who I trust completely. If I can get him to do an independent assessment of your daughter without Dr. Caldwell knowing, he can tell us whether her neurological state actually matches what's in that chart. Can you get him here today? I already texted him. He's on the floor. I looked at this young woman who had every reason to keep her head down and had chosen not to. What do you need from me? I need you to go back in there and buy me 40 minutes. Ask questions. Make them explain everything twice. If they say anything that sounds like an admission, anything about finances, anything about timing, anything about what happens next, I need you to let me know so I can make sure it's documented through the room audio system. All patient rooms have audio monitoring for safety. I can have it activated from the nursing station remotely. I smoothed my slacks. I thought about Claire at Christmas, sitting at my kitchen table with her hands wrapped around a mug of chamomile tea, saying, "Mom, I just need a little more time to get everything in order." I thought about how I had said, "Sweetheart, take all the time you need." 40 minutes, I said. I'll give you 40 minutes. I walked back into that room with the face I had spent 35 years developing. The face that said, I am calm and I am listening and I am giving nothing away. Which is the only face that survives a career in family law. Brandon looked up with poorly concealed impatience. Ingrid had sat down, which struck me as presumptuous, given that she was supposedly just a grief counselor, and not actually family. I'm sorry, I said. There were some questions about the medication schedule. I picked up the pen. Then, I set it back down. Actually, before I sign, can you walk me through the timeline again? I want to make sure I understand everything correctly. Brandon's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Miriam, we've been over this. I know. I'm sorry. She's my daughter. Humor me. He walked me through it again. Claire had collapsed on Monday morning around 8:30. He'd found her in the kitchen. He'd called 911. She'd been unresponsive when the paramedics arrived. How long between finding her and calling 911? I asked. Immediately. You went straight to the phone? A beat. A very small beat, but I felt it. I checked on her first. Made sure she was breathing. Then I called. Of course, I said. And the aneurysm? Did Dr. Caldwell explain to you which vessel was affected? I remember from when my husband had a TIA, they were very specific about the location. He didn't know. He fumbled through an answer, and Ingrid helped him with terminology that she was too fluent with, for someone who was supposedly just there for emotional support. Ingrid, I said pleasantly, which agency are you with? I'd love to send them a letter. You've clearly been a real comfort to Brandon. She looked at Brandon. He said, quickly, That's not necessary, Miriam. I'd like to see the imaging, I said. The CT and the angiogram. As her healthcare proxy, I have the right to review her medical records, and I'd just feel better seeing the actual scans before I sign anything. The scans are with Dr. Caldwell. We can request them, but it could take hours. And Miriam. Brandon leaned forward, and I saw something shift behind his eyes, something that had been patient and was running out of patience. Every hour that we delay this is another hour that Claire is suffering. You don't want that. I know you don't. Suffering? I said. The doctors said she has no brain activity. How does she suffer if there's no brain activity? Ingrid said. It's more of an expression. I know it's an expression, I said. I'm asking Brandon. Silence, you're right, Brandon said, and I watched him recalibrate in real time, smoothing his voice back into something softer. Poor choice of words. I'm exhausted, Miriam. We all are. I just want this to be over. I want this to be over. I looked at my daughter's face. I said, give me 5 minutes alone with her, please. Brandon opened his mouth. She's my daughter, I said simply. Without drama. He couldn't say no to that without becoming something he couldn't explain, so he stood and gestured for Ingrid to follow him into the hallway. I waited until the door clicked shut behind them, and then I went to Claire's bedside and took her hand in both of mine. I'm here, baby, I whispered. Whatever is happening, I'm here, and I'm not signing anything. Not until I know. I was watching her face when it happened. Such a small thing. The faintest tightening at the corner of her mouth there and gone in less than a second, but I saw it. Siobhan Keating came back into the room 11 minutes later, and she wasn't alone. The man with her was short and calm and wore the particular expression of someone who has just seen something that made him very angry and is keeping it contained through long professional practice. Mrs. Aldridge, he said, I'm Dr. O.C. Neurology. I've just reviewed your daughter's chart and conducted a brief independent assessment. I have some serious concerns about the accuracy of the documented neurological findings, and I've already contacted the hospital's patient safety officer and the Denver Police Department. He paused. Your daughter is not brain dead. She is in a pharmacologically induced comatose state secondary to a sedative overdose that is not consistent with her documented treatment plan. I heard my own breath go out of me. There's more, Siobhan said quietly. She held up her phone, showing me footage pulled from the hospital's security system. Hallway camera, timestamped 11:47 p.m. last Saturday. Brandon and Dr. Caldwell in the corridor near the parking structure entrance. Dr. Caldwell accepting something from Brandon, the handshake that followed too long and too deliberate for a casual encounter. And then she showed me something that Siobhan had found through a contact in hospital security who owed her a favor. The kind of thing that seemed almost impossible until she explained it. Brandon had installed a home security system with indoor cameras 2 years ago. Claire had given the login credentials to her divorce attorney, Miss Harrington, who had flagged them as potentially relevant to the asset protection case and saved the cloud footage. The attorney had been contacted by police after Siobhan's report, and they'd moved quickly. Monday morning, 7:58 a.m. Brandon entering the bedroom where Claire was still asleep, a small case in his hand. At 8:31, he was on his phone in the kitchen. At 8:34, the 911 call was made. 33 minutes after he had gone into that room. I had to hold on to the bed rail. We need to keep him in the building, Dr. O.C. said. The officers are 4 minutes out. I walked into the hallway. Brandon was leaning against the wall, arms crossed, doing the performance of a grieving husband who was also a busy man being kept from necessary tasks. Ingrid was beside him. When they saw me, they both straightened with those matching expressions of anticipation that I recognize now for exactly what they were. I'm ready, I said. We went back into the room. I picked up the pen, I held it over the first signature line, and then I looked up at my son-in-law, this man who had sat beside me at my daughter's bedside and held my hand and called me by my first name and thanked me for being strong, and I said, Brandon, when did you start planning this? The color left his face so fast it was like watching someone pull a plug. What are you? Because the thing about 35 years in family law, I said, is that you learn a great deal about what people are willing to do when they find out they're about to lose money. And you learn how to read the signs. I set down the pen. You waited 33 minutes to call 911. The cameras in your own house recorded you going into the room where Claire was sleeping at 7:58 in the morning. Dr. Caldwell has been accepting payments to falsify her neurological assessment. And my daughter, my voice cracked, just once, and I let it. My daughter is not brain dead, she's sedated, and she's going to wake up. Brandon moved toward the door. Two Denver police officers stepped through it. Ingrid made a sound that I won't describe and sat down heavily on the chair she had been occupying like she belonged there. "Brandon Aldridge," one of the officers said, "you're under arrest for attempted first-degree murder. You have the right to remain silent." Dr. Caldwell was picked up in the physician's parking lot 20 minutes later. Claire's sedation was carefully reduced over the following 18 hours under Dr. Osie's direct supervision. I did not leave the hospital. I slept in a chair beside her bed, her hand in mine, and I talked to her the way I used to talk to her when she was small and had nightmares. I just talked. About nothing. About Tucson and the garden and the neighbor's ridiculous rooster and her aunt's new puppy and the green child recipe I kept meaning to write down before I forgot it. At 6:14 on a Thursday morning, her eyes opened. She looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then she turned her head and looked at me. "Mom," she said. Just that, barely a sound. "Hi, baby girl," I said. We cried for a while without talking. The monitors beeped. The sun came up over the Rockies outside the window. Later, when she was stronger, when the tubes were out and she could sit up and hold a cup of water herself, she asked me what had happened. I told her all of it, and I watched her face move through shock and grief, and something that I can only describe as a terrible clarity. The look of a person who had suspected something for a long time and was now receiving the confirmation that they had not been wrong. The full scope of it came out over the following weeks. Brandon had been moving money for months, rerouting from their joint investment accounts into an LLC Ingrid had set up in her name in Delaware. The house had been appraised without Claire's knowledge. A real estate attorney friend of Brandon's had done it and sent the report directly to him. The life insurance payout, $1.2 million, would have gone to him immediately. He and Ingrid had a rental property under contract in Portugal, not the Cayman Islands, but the instinct is the same. Get the money and get out of the country before anyone can ask questions. Brandon was charged with attempted first-degree murder, Ingrid with conspiracy to commit murder and financial fraud. Dr. Caldwell lost his license, his freedom, and, I gather, the considerable amount of money he thought he had secured for himself, since it was entered as evidence. The judge at Brandon's preliminary hearing denied bail given the flight risk. His attorney, a very expensive man from a very expensive firm, has a lot of work ahead of him. Claire filed for divorce from her hospital bed. Miss Harrington, the attorney she'd been quietly consulting with for months, was there within the hour. She spent 6 weeks in the hospital in total and 3 months in a rehabilitation facility in Boulder, working on the right side weakness the initial neurological insult had left behind. She walks without a cane now. She still gets headaches. She still has days that are harder than others. She told me once, sitting on my back porch in Tucson while the sun went down behind the mountains, that the hardest part wasn't the physical recovery. The hardest part was accepting that the person she'd built a life with had been planning to end her life. That was the thing she was still working through. I told her she could take as long as she needed. There's a moment in this story that I keep coming back to, and it isn't the confrontation with Brandon, though that was satisfying in a way I'm not ashamed to admit. It isn't the call from the district attorney's office, or the headline in the Denver Post, or the moment the judge looked at Brandon across that courtroom. The moment I keep coming back to is Siobhan Keating in that consultation room, door locked, hands shaking, saying, "I could lose my job for this. I want you to know I know that going in." She didn't lose her job. She received a formal commendation from St. Andrew's medical leadership, which is the least they could do, and she was profiled in a Colorado nursing journal about patient advocacy. Claire wrote her a letter that I'm told made Siobhan cry for a while in the hospital break room, and then Claire set up a fund in her name through the University of Colorado nursing program for students who demonstrate exceptional ethical courage. She's just young, Siobhan is. Maybe 26, 27. She'll spend the rest of her career in hospitals, and I think about the other patients she'll look after over the decades. The ones who will never know that the nurse who insisted on checking on them one more time, who reported the discrepancy that didn't feel right, who refused to let it go even when she was told to. I think about the lives she will save without anyone ever writing an article about it, without any commendation or fund or letter. She saved my daughter's life because she trusted what she saw over what she was told. That's not a small thing, that's the whole thing. Last October, Claire and I went to Charleston, South Carolina for a long weekend. She'd always wanted to see it. The old houses, the harbor, the light. We walked more than she probably should have the first day, and she paid for it the second, but by the third day she was fine, and we sat on a restaurant porch eating shrimp and grits and drinking sweet tea while the sun went size across the water and the evening came in soft and warm. "I've been thinking about what I want," she said at some point. "About what?" "Just what I want. From now on, what I want my life to look like." She was quiet for a moment, watching the water. I used to spend so much time managing around what Brandon wanted, what would make him happy, what would keep things calm. And I thought I was being practical, reasonable. She shook her head. "I just want to do what I want to do." "So do that," I said. She looked at me and smiled, and it was the smile I remembered from when she was 7 years old, unguarded, a little mischievous, entirely herself. "Yeah," she said. "I think I will." The waiter came and we ordered another round of sweet tea, and somewhere behind us someone was playing guitar, and the evening stretched out long and golden, and I thought, we almost lost this. We came so close to losing all of this. And then I let the thought go, because she was sitting across from me and she was alive, and that was the whole story. So if you've ever been in a room and felt, in your body before your mind could catch up, that something was wrong, trust that. Ask the 5 minutes of friction. Be the person who says not yet, even when every social pressure in the room is telling you to just sign and let it be over. Those 5 minutes are everything. Share this with someone who needs to hear it and tell me in the comments. Have you ever trusted a gut feeling that turned out to save something important? Because I read every single one, and some of your stories are extraordinary. And if you want more true stories about the moments that change everything, subscribe to Twisted RTC Stories. I'll see you in the next one.